Today I want to talk about Atomic Heart's art style, art direction, and just the overall beauty of the game when it comes to its visual design and presentation. As always, this video will look like it's from the 80s, as I think that's an interesting way of presenting gaming related content that sets me apart from other YouTubers. The game has a bunch of different real life styles it's inspired by, even though unfortunately you will see less and less of them as the game moves past its very clean and well-made intro section. After that, the visuals start feeling a lot cheaper and less detailed. Nonetheless, the game has some amazing art direction, and so I figured, why not make a video about it? The architecture of the buildings in the game is clearly based on two different types of Soviet architecture, Constructivist and Stalinist, the latter being the most prominent. Constructivist architecture was a constructivist style of modern architecture that flourished in the Soviet Union in the 1920s and early 1930s. Designs combined advanced technology and engineering with a communist social purpose. Although it was divided into several competing factions, the movement produced many pioneering projects and finished buildings before falling out of favor around 1932. It has left marked effects on later developments in architecture. In Atomic Heart, you can see how especially the Vavilov facility and scientific research buildings are made in a constructivist style, as well as the train stations, which makes sense as, based on the lore in-game, they were first built in the late 1920s and 30s. What you see in-game, however, is not just futuristic because the game takes place in a sci-fi environment. It's based in reality, at least partially. Constructivist architecture emerged from the wider constructivist art movement, which grew out of Russian futurism. Constructivist art had attempted to apply a three-dimensional cubist vision to abstract, non-objective constructions with a kinetic element. After the Russian Revolution of 1917, it turned its attention to the new social demands and industrial tasks required of the new regime. Now, in reality, this style wasn't as widespread or complex as you see in the game, but it's obvious that constructivist futurism was one of the developers' main inspirations. Playing the game, you will notice a lot of in-game art and posters that are done in this futuristic style. Eventually, constructivism started to slowly fall out of style as it was criticized for merely copying forms of technology while using fairly routine construction methods. What followed was a style that would eventually become known as Stalinist style or Stalinist architecture. Stalinist architecture does not equate to everything built under Stalin's era. It relied on labor-intensive and time-consuming masonry and could not be scaled to the needs of mass construction. This inefficiency largely ended Stalinist architecture and resulted in mass construction methods which began while Stalin was still alive. Although Stalin rejected constructivism, completion of constructivist buildings extended through the 1930s. The first years of Stalinist architecture are characterized by individual buildings, or at most, single-block development projects. Rebuilding vast spaces of Moscow proved much more difficult than razing historic districts. Early on in the game, in the Bioshock-like introductory area, you will see blocks and rows of apartments. These are made of a mixed design between Stalinism and something that would become popular after Stalin's death called Khrushchevki, named after Nikita Khrushchev, Stalin's successor. Now in the game, we don't actually know if Stalin is alive or not. Historically, since the game takes place in 1955, the Soviet Führer was already dead. The game doesn't mention Stalin at all, nor who the current leader of the Soviet Union is, so all we can do is speculate. These apartment blocks were, however, notorious for being awfully made and not a good place to live in. Among some of the known issues were extremely thin walls through which you could easily hear your neighbors talk or sleep with each other. The apartments were small and not comfortable, barely having enough room for a family, and the buildings were known for falling apart frequently, as no maintenance was done in most cases. Residential construction in post-war cities was segregated according to the ranks of tenants. No effort was made to conceal luxuries. Sometimes they were evident, sometimes deliberately exaggerated. Country residencies of Stalin's officials were on the top level. So was the 1945 House of Lions by Ivan Zolotovsky, a luxurious downtown residence for Red Army marshals. There was a type of building for every rank of Stalin's hierarchy. So while the politicians and ideologues were preaching the grand idea of a communist equal society, in reality they themselves were not following those ideals. Do as I say, not as I do. They had no problem living in luxury, laughing at all the peasants, thinking there would be any form of equality. However, the most prominent example of Stalinist architecture in the game is the Icarus building that you will see in the beginning and later half of the game. It's very clear that it is inspired, if not even a blank copy, of the Seven Sisters. In particular, the Red Gate building and the main building of the Moscow State University. The Seven Sisters are a group of 7 skyscrapers in Moscow designed in the Stalinist style. They were built from 1947 to 1953. At the time of construction, they were the tallest buildings in Europe.